Well, good morning, scientists. So today you were learning about tides. Actually, that was the other day you were learning about tides. So we've got the high tide and the low tide. So the tides change due to gravity, and it's the gravity of the moon. So if the moon was overhead, we'd have a high tide. The water level would be higher than its normal average water level at the ocean. And if the moon was, let's say, at a right angle, like low on the horizon or over there, we'd have low tide. So it would be a low tide where the water level is much lower than its average. And then if the moon's somewhere in between, well, we're kind of in between tides. So as the moon's in one spot and the Earth rotates, the tides change. So what we end up having is 2 high tides a day and 2 low tides. So for example, if I was going to take my kayak out and go paddling, let's say over at the state park there, over at Whiskey Creek, at low tide, there's some places where there's only a few inches of water and I'd have to get out and walk my kayak. That's not much fun. So I'm gonna check the tide tables and make sure that I go usually anywhere, usually try to go at high tide or somewhere in between low and high tide. But I don't wanna be there an hour before or after low tide because there's not gonna be enough water to pass through. So ships have to do the same thing. So if you're the captain of a freighter or a cruise ship, or even if you had a captain's license and you're taking people out on a boat, you'd have to know when the high tides and low tides are, so that way your ship could get through shallower areas, or when it could fit under bridges, or it might not fit under certain bridges, depending on the water level. So knowing the tides is very helpful, especially around here in South Florida, where there's a lot of boating going on. So the main thing that caused the tides would be the moon's gravity. The sun's gravity has an effect too, but not quite as much. Now the 2 tides that you've probably already learned about were the spring tide and neap tide. Now for spring tide, you have the biggest difference between the high and low tide. So the low tide is going to be very low and the high tide is going to be very high. That's what a spring tide is. That's when the sun, the moon, and earth, they're all in a straight line. Now on a neap tide, that's the high tide and low tide. The difference between the two is going to be much smaller. With a low tide, you're still going to have a low, you're still going to have a high, but the difference between the two is much less. And that's when the sun, the moon, and the earth are all at a right angle. So you'd have the earth, the sun, and the moon, they'd all make a right angle or 90 degrees. So that's the difference between spring tide and neap tide. Now, sometimes you hear the spring tide referred to these days as a king tide, where you have the really high tides, and that's when the sun, the moon, and the earth, where the moon and the sun are both on the same side, and they make the tides even higher on that side. And then sometimes due to the wind, is also pushing water up on shore at the same time, and we have a really high tide, and certain roads and stuff over near the beach get flooded. So that's about tide. Now what your job today is to do the study guide. So you get tides, now you got the study guide. The study guide has 17 questions. They're all listed in the module. You could print it out, handwrite the questions, you could copy all the questions, put them in a Word document, type them there. That's not for a grade, that's for you to use all your notes, go back, look at the videos, and that's a study tool for you. Do that before the test. Tomorrow's video, make sure you watch tomorrow's video. I'm going to go over all the answers to the study guide, but to use it as a real study tool, do the study guide on your own. Try to figure out as many answers as you can. If there's 2 or 3 of them that you're stuck on or you're not quite sure, don't worry, relax, don't stress out. I'm going to go over the answers to that tomorrow, just like we would in class. If I gave you a study guide, usually in class we'd go over it. Tomorrow I'm going to do a video going over all the answers. All right? So get the study guide done today, go back, look at any videos, look at the notes. The easiest thing to look at would probably be the slides, where there is the Eclipse PDF slides, there was a Tide slide PDF, and there was the Seasons PDF slides too, where it had, it was like a little slideshow broken into different parts. If you look at that, that has most of the answers you need right there. All right? Good luck with that, and we'll talk tomorrow. If you have any questions, inbox me if you're stuck or confused, and until then, stay curious.